Holy God Almighty! Eleanor Wilson's coffee mug shatters on her porch steps. 100 gleaming motorcycles filled her yard in Detroit's East Warren neighborhood. Sunlight ricochets off chrome. No riders in sight. Just a handwritten note. You fed us when no one would. Now we feed you. Her fingers tremble as she unfolds the paper. Keys in each ignition, it concludes. 7 days from foreclosure, and this happens. Eleanor, 68, touches the embossed leather seat of the nearest bike. Midnight Riders, MC. The same patch worn by those 15 bikers who appeared in last night's downpour. The same men the fancy bistro across the street turned away with undisguised contempt. Her phone buzzes. Thomas, her son. Mama! Turn on Channel 7. Now. She scrambles inside, fumbles for the remote. The TV blares to life. Breaking news from East Warren, announces the anchor, eyes wide. 100 motorcycles worth over $2 million delivered overnight to a local restaurant owner. Our helicopter is live at the scene. The camera swoops over Eleanor's property. The bikes gleam in military straight rows. Sources confirm the Midnight Riders Motorcycle Club has not only gifted these vehicles, continues the reporter, but their attorney has also paid off Mrs. Wilson's outstanding mortgage on both her home and business properties, $450,000 in total. Eleanor grips the armchair, knuckles white. A silver-haired man in a leather vest appears on screen. No comment, he tells reporters, except this. When you're judged your whole life, you remember who sees past the leather. The remote slips from Eleanor's fingers. Thud. Yesterday, a struggling restaurant owner about to lose everything. Today, debt-free with $2 million in motorcycles. Tomorrow? What exactly? She stares at her weathered hands, the same hands that served gumbo to those rain-soaked strangers when everyone else locked their doors. The same hands that now hold keys to a fortune she never asked for and can't comprehend. What happens when a simple act of kindness crashes headfirst into life-changing consequence? And what price might come attached to such an extravagant reward? 3 days earlier. Eleanor wipes condensation from the window of Soul Plates, the restaurant she's owned for 32 years. Rain drums against the roof as she studies the foreclosure notice in her hand. Final payment due in 10 days or everything goes to auction. The dining room stands empty, save for one table where Thomas sits hunched over his laptop. At 35, her son bears the weight of his recent layoff from the architectural firm where he'd worked for a decade. You should have told me how bad it got, Mama, he says without looking up from the screen. And what would you have done? Given up your apartment in Chicago to come save your old mother? Eleanor tucks the notice into her apron pocket. Besides, who could have predicted 3 pipes bursting in the same winter? What she doesn't mention, how the bank denied her loan application 3 times, despite her perfect payment history for 3 decades. How the loan officer had smirked while explaining she was high risk due to current economic factors in this particular neighborhood. Across the street, the newly opened Emerson's Bistro gleams with polished windows and a packed dining room despite the weather. The owner, Jeffrey Emerson, whose grandfather once owned the building Eleanor now occupies, makes no secret of his desire to restore the block to its former glory by buying up properties for his expansion plans. Eleanor's phone rings. It's her last remaining employee, Darius, calling to say his car broke down. Again. She can't blame him, working for reduced wages these past months while she tried to stay afloat. Don't worry about it, baby. I can handle tonight solo. The bell above the door chimes. In walks Howard Sullivan, the bank manager, escorted by Jeffrey Emerson, both men in expensive suits despite the downpour. Mrs. Wilson. Sullivan's voice is professionally cordial while his eyes survey the empty tables. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd check in regarding our arrangement. My payment's going to be on time, Mr. Sullivan, Eleanor says, straightening her spine despite the arthritis flaring in her lower back. Jeffrey interjects, Eleanor, I've prepared a very generous offer. He slides an envelope across the counter. Given the circumstances, this is more than fair. The amount on the paper inside is barely enough to cover her outstanding mortgage. Nothing for the 3 decades of blood and sweat she's poured into the place. Nothing for starting over. This place has been in my family since my grandmother converted it from a laundry in 1967, Eleanor replies. She scrubbed white folks' floors for 20 years to save up for this building. History doesn't pay bills, Mrs. Wilson, Sullivan says with practiced sympathy. And the neighborhood is changing. You might want to consider this opportunity before it expires. Thomas appears beside her, having overheard. My mother said she'll make the payment, gentlemen. Of course, Jeffrey smiles thinly. Though in this economy, with establishments like yours struggling and more contemporary options thriving, it might be prudent to consider alternatives. After they leave, Thomas slams his palm against the counter. They're waiting for you to fail, Mama. Sullivan is probably fast-tracking Emerson's loan for the whole block while denying yours. They've been waiting for me to fail for 32 years, Eleanor responds, returning to the kitchen where she methodically prepares for a dinner service that will likely bring in fewer than 10 customers. Through the window, she watches couples hurrying through the rain into Emerson's bistro, where a sign advertises a wine-tasting event. The host turns away a young black couple, gesturing to a reservations-only sign that wasn't there yesterday. The couple walks to Soul Plates instead, shaking off rain as they enter. Mrs. Wilson. Smells amazing in here as always, says the woman, Tasha, a nurse at Detroit Medical who's been coming in since she was a child. 2 specials? Eleanor asks, already knowing their order. You know it, and we're celebrating tonight. Jason got the promotion. Eleanor serves them her grandmother's recipe for braised short ribs, the sauce simmered for 12 hours. As they eat, more regulars trickle in, not enough to fill the restaurant, but enough to remind her why she keeps fighting. Her food carries memories, traditions, connection. After closing, Eleanor counts the night's earnings. Not enough. Not nearly enough. 7 days until she loses everything. She considers calling her daughter in Atlanta, who's been begging her to retire, to move south, to let go of the struggle. But giving up Soul Plates means giving up the last physical connection to her grandmother who taught her to cook, to her late husband who built the tables with his own hands, to a lifetime of feeding her community. As she wipes down the counters, her hand brushes against her grandmother's vintage Le Creuset Dutch oven, Caribbean blue, still perfect after 50 years of use. The one luxury Grandma Olivia allowed herself after buying the building. Cook with pride, she'd told Eleanor, and never let them convince you your work isn't valuable. Eleanor glances out the window. Jeffrey Emerson stands across the street, phone to his ear, pointing toward her building. In a world that prizes the shiny and new, the greatest rebellion is preserving what has soul. What's he planning now? And how is she going to pull off a miracle in 7 days when 32 years of hard work hasn't been enough to protect what's hers? The next morning, Eleanor arrives at Soul Plates earlier than usual. Sleep had evaded her, mind racing with calculations and possibilities, none of them promising. She finds a white envelope taped to the door. Another notice, this one from the city's health department scheduling a random inspection for tomorrow. Random, sure. Like the 3 others in the past 6 months, each more nitpicky than the last. Inside, she calls Thomas. They're circling, she tells him when he answers. The inspection is tomorrow? Thomas sounds alert despite the early hour. I'll be there. My friend Cornell works in the city planning office. He says Emerson filed permits for expanded outdoor seating, claiming parts of what's technically your property line. Eleanor's blood pressure spikes. He can't do that. He can if he has the right friends at City Hall, Mama. Cornell says there's talk about revitalization grants for the block that somehow only Emerson's properties qualify for. After hanging up, Eleanor starts prep work, chopping onions with more force than necessary. The bell above the door chimes. Darius arrives, hair still damp from the shower. "Ms. Eleanor, I'm so sorry about yesterday. My transmission—" "It's all right, baby. I know you're doing your best." She hands him an apron. "But I need you solid today. Inspector coming tomorrow." "Again?" "That's the fourth one this year." "Exactly." By noon, the lunch crowd is decent, mostly regulars from the neighborhood and workers from nearby businesses. Eleanor is serving a table when the door opens and in walks Cynthia Powell, the health inspector who's conducted the last 3 random visits. "Ms. Powell," Eleanor says, wiping her hands on her apron, "inspection's scheduled for tomorrow." "Just grabbing lunch today, Mrs. Wilson." Powell's smile doesn't reach her eyes. "Thought I'd try this place everyone's talking about." Eleanor returns to the kitchen, watching through the service window as Powell scrutinizes everything, running a finger along the edge of a table, examining her water glass against the light, taking photos with her phone. "She's scouting," Darius whispers. "My cousin works at Tiny's Grill over on 8 Mile. They pulled the same routine before hitting them with violations." When Powell leaves without finishing her food, Eleanor's shoulders tense. The afternoon brings a new problem. The food supplier delivers only half her order, claiming a system error with her account. "Your credit hold was activated," the delivery man explains uncomfortably. "Manager says until the outstanding balance is cleared." "What outstanding balance?" "I paid the invoice last week." The man shrugs. "Above my pay grade, ma'am." Eleanor calls the supply company, navigating an automated system for 20 minutes before reaching a representative who confirms her payment was received but flagged for review, a process that could take 7 to 10 business days to resolve, days she doesn't have. "I need those supplies today," she insists. "I understand your frustration, but there's nothing I can do until the financial department clears the hold." After another hour of calls and being transferred between departments, Eleanor hangs up in frustration. She'll have to use what she has and make an emergency run to the restaurant supply store, paying retail prices she can't afford. As she's counting cash from the register to fund this unexpected expense, Jeffrey Emerson appears at the counter. "Having supplier troubles?" he asks, his tone suggesting he already knows the answer. Eleanor stares at him. "You did this?" "Did what?" "I'm just a businessman noticing another business struggling." He leans in. "My offer stands, Eleanor. Though I should mention, property values on this block are dropping with all these inspection issues happening. My number might need to be adjusted downward soon." After he leaves, Eleanor's hands shake so badly she drops a stack of plates. The crash brings Darius running. "Miss Eleanor, you okay?" She nods, though she's anything but okay. "Need you to watch the place for an hour. I've got to get supplies." At the restaurant supply store, Eleanor fills her cart with only the essentials, calculating costs as she goes. The total is still more than she can comfortably spare. As she's checking out, her credit card is declined. "Try it again," she tells the cashier. Declined again. She tries her personal card. Same result. The cashier looks uncomfortable as the line grows behind Eleanor. "Maybe call your bank?" Eleanor steps aside, cheeks burning with humiliation as she calls the bank. After providing multiple forms of identification and answering security questions, she learns both her business and personal accounts have been flagged for suspicious activity and temporarily frozen. "This is the 4th case I've handled today from your neighborhood," the bank representative says. "Might be a data breach at one of the local merchants." By the time Eleanor gets the freeze lifted and returns to Soul Plates with the supplies, 2 hours have passed. She finds Thomas arguing with a city official outside the restaurant. "What now?" she asks, lugging bags from her car. The official, a thin man with a clipboard, looks bored. Complaint about signage violations. Your awning extends 6 inches beyond regulation, and your sidewalk sign creates a pedestrian obstacle. That awning and sign have been there for 30 years. Regulations changed last month. He hands her a citation. You have 48 hours to comply or face fines of $200 per day. Eleanor watches him walk directly across the street to Emerson's Bistro, where the outdoor seating clearly extends beyond property lines, and nod cordially to Jeffrey before driving away without inspection. This is coordinated, Thomas says, taking bags from her hands. They're trying to bury you in violations and complications before the mortgage deadline. Inside, Darius looks anxious. Ms. Eleanor, we've got another problem. The health department called while you were gone. They've moved tomorrow's inspection to today. Said they're arriving in an hour. Eleanor sets down her purse, draws a deep breath, and ties her apron with determined hands. Thomas, run to the hardware store. Get cleaning supplies. The industrial strength stuff. Darius, start pulling everything out of the refrigerators. I'll call Tasha and see if any of her hospital friends can come for an early dinner. We need this place full and functioning when they arrive. The next hour is a blur of activity. Thomas scrubs every surface, Darius reorganizes storage areas, and Eleanor cooks with focused intensity. Several of Tasha's colleagues arrive, filling tables just as Inspector Powell walks in with 2 assistants. For the next 2 hours, they scrutinize every corner of Soul Plates while Eleanor continues service, her smile fixed in place as she feels Powell's eyes following her every move. Finally, Powell approaches the counter with her clipboard. Several minor violations, Mrs. Wilson. Eleanor reviews the list. A loose refrigerator gasket, boxes stored too close to the floor, a hairline crack in one tile beneath the sink. Nothing critical, but these will need to be addressed within 72 hours. Powell's expression is unreadable. We'll return for follow-up. After they leave, Eleanor slumps against the counter. 3 more problems to solve with money she doesn't have. The dinner service continues, busier than usual thanks to Tasha's friends, but Eleanor's thoughts are elsewhere. 3 days until the mortgage payment is due. Suppliers restricting credit, equipment needing repairs, citations requiring immediate attention. As she's closing up, rain begins falling again. Gentle at first, then a sudden downpour that sends rivers down the street. Eleanor watches water pool at the corner where the city's promised drainage improvements never materialized in this neighborhood. Her phone rings. Thomas, checking in. I'm fine, she tells him, though her voice betrays her exhaustion. Just finishing up. I've been making calls all day, Mama. Something's not right with how coordinated these problems are. Cornell's looking into the inspection patterns, and I've got a friend at Channel 7 who might be interested in a story about targeted enforcement. We don't have proof, Thomas. Not yet. But the call cuts off as thunder crashes overhead. Eleanor tries redialing, but the service is out. The lights flicker once, twice, then stabilize. She's wiping down the last table when a flash of lightning illuminates the street outside. Through the curtain of rain, she sees a line of motorcycles approaching, headlights cutting through the darkness. They stop directly in front of Soul Plates. 15 riders in black leather jackets, soaked to the skin. The lead rider dismounts and approaches her door. Eleanor hesitates. The neighborhood has its share of motorcycle clubs, some with unsavory reputations. She's never had trouble with them, but 15 large men arriving at closing time during a storm sets off warning bells. The rider knocks. Through the glass, Eleanor sees a weathered face beneath a gray beard, eyes squinting against the rain. Behind him, the others wait, shoulders hunched against the downpour. Against her better judgment, Eleanor moves to the door. Her grandmother always said you could tell a person's character by how they ask for help. She turns the lock and opens the door a crack. We're closed, she says, voice firm despite her apprehension. Ma'am, the man says, rain dripping from his beard. We got caught in this storm. Every place is closed or won't serve us. We saw your lights. Could we just wait it out? Maybe get some coffee? Eleanor studies his face, then looks past him to the others, diverse in age and race, but all wearing the same leather cuts with a distinctive insignia, a midnight blue rider against a silver moon. Across the street, she notices Jeffrey Emerson watching from his bistro's window, phone in hand, pointing toward the bikers. The man follows her gaze. We tried there first. They said they were having a private event. His mouth twists. Funny, since we could see empty tables. Eleanor makes her decision, pushing the door wide open. Coffee's free. Food costs money. Come in before you all catch pneumonia. As the riders file in, shaking off rain, Eleanor realizes she's just invited 15 strangers into her empty restaurant during a storm, with no staff, no security, and no way to call for help if things go wrong. What has she done? And who exactly are these men with their leather vests and road-worn faces that struck such fear in Jeffrey Emerson that he's still watching them through his window, talking urgently into his phone? The bikers arrange themselves at 3 tables pushed together, leather jackets squeaking against vinyl seats. They're a weathered group, most in their 40s and 50s, with a few younger faces mixed in. Despite their imposing appearance, they maintain a respectful quiet, murmuring thanks as Eleanor brings a tray of coffee mugs. Storm's supposed to pass in an hour, she says, setting down sugar and creamer. You all just passing through or local? The gray-bearded man who'd knocked extends a calloused hand. Name's Walter Bishop. Most call me Bishop. We're the Midnight Riders MC Detroit chapter, heading back from a charity run in Cleveland. Charity? Eleanor asks, unable to hide her surprise. A younger rider with dark skin and intricate tattoos covering his arms laughs. Everyone's shocked when they hear that part. We raised $30,000 for the Children's Hospital this weekend. Eleanor nods, embarrassed by her assumption. Menu's limited this late, but I've got gumbo that's been simmering all day. Or I can do breakfast. Gumbo sounds perfect, ma'am, Bishop says. And whatever else you recommend. We'll take one of everything if you've got it. Been a long ride on empty stomachs. As Eleanor returns to the kitchen, she hears them discussing the storm, routes home, families waiting. Normal conversation, not the rowdy behavior she'd half expected. Through the service window, she watches them remove their wet jackets, revealing t-shirts beneath, some with family photos printed on them, others with veteran insignias. She prepares 15 bowls of gumbo, adding cornbread fresh from that afternoon. As she works, she notices one rider, a tall man with salt and pepper dreadlocks, studying the foreclosure notice she'd left on the counter by mistake. When she emerges with the first tray, he quickly sets it down, but not before she sees the concern in his eyes. 7 days is a tight timeline, he comments. Banks don't give much breathing room these days. They never have, Eleanor responds, setting down bowls. Not in this neighborhood, anyway. While the men eat, Eleanor busies herself with cleanup, listening to their conversation drift from motorcycles to family to community projects. She learns that Bishop is a retired mechanical engineer, that the young tattooed rider teaches music at a youth center, that several are business owners themselves. This is the best gumbo I've had outside of New Orleans, declares a rider with a Louisiana accent. Reminds me of my grandmother's. That's high praise, Eleanor says, warmed by the compliment. It's my grandmother's recipe, too. Taught me when I was knee-high, standing on a stool to reach the stove. The storm intensifies, rain hammering against the roof hard enough to make conversation difficult. Lightning flashes, followed immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. The lights go out, plunging the restaurant into darkness. Everyone stay put, Eleanor says, reaching for her phone's flashlight. Generator should kick in. But the backup power doesn't engage. Eleanor fumbles her way to the storeroom where the ancient generator controls are located, the rider's phone lights creating islands of illumination in the darkened space. Need help? Bishop asks, following her with his own light. Things temperamental, Eleanor admits, examining the generator panel. And I can't afford to replace it. Bishop studies the setup, then kneels to examine the connections. Looks like a failed transfer switch. Got tools? For the next 20 minutes, Eleanor holds a flashlight while Bishop works on the generator. The rider with dreadlocks joins them, introducing himself as Franklin, an electrical contractor. Banks making it hard for small businesses everywhere, Franklin comments as they work. My cousin lost his barber shop last year. Same pattern. Surprise inspections, supplier issues, loan denials. Sounds familiar, Eleanor says cautiously. Systematic, Franklin agrees, his eyes meeting hers with understanding. They call it business, but there's another word for it. The generator hums to life, lights flickering back on throughout the restaurant. When they return to the dining area, Eleanor notices several riders have cleared tables and washed dishes in her absence. Didn't want to leave a mess, explains the tattooed music teacher. My mama raised me better than that. Eleanor brings out coffee refills and slices of sweet potato pie she'd been saving for tomorrow. As she serves them, she notices a small album that's fallen from one rider's jacket. When she picks it up, it falls open to reveal photos of children in hospital beds, each holding handmade cards thanking the midnight riders. The rider, a woman in her 60s with close-cropped silver hair, gently takes it back. Our annual ride. Started it after my grandson beat leukemia. That's beautiful, Eleanor says sincerely. Community takes care of its own, the woman responds. Or should. Across the street, Eleanor notices lights still on at Emerson's Bistro. Jeffrey stands in the window, now accompanied by two men in suits, despite the late hour. One looks familiar. She recognizes Howard Sullivan from the bank. Bishop follows her gaze. Friend of yours? Opposite, Eleanor admits. That's the man trying to take my building. Been after it for years. His grandfather owned it before mine bought it in the 60s. Now he's got friends helping squeeze me out. Bishop studies the men across the street, his expression hardening. Sullivan? From First Metropolitan? You know him. Let's say our paths have crossed. Bishop exchanges glances with Franklin, something unspoken passing between them. The storm begins to abate, rain softening to a gentle patter. Riders check phones, announce it's time to move on. They insist on paying, leaving generous cash tips despite Eleanor's protests. As they prepare to leave, Bishop hangs back, examining a faded photograph on the wall. Eleanor's grandmother standing proudly in front of the building on opening day, 1967. Your grandmother? He asks. Olivia Wilson. Toughest woman I ever knew. Taught me everything about food and not backing down. Bishop nods, respect evident in his eyes. Reminds me of my mother. Same determination. He studies the photo a moment longer. Thank you for your kindness tonight, Mrs. Wilson. Not everyone would open their doors to people who look like us. I judge by actions, not appearances, Eleanor responds. My grandmother taught me that too. As the riders mount their motorcycles, Eleanor notices Franklin speaking intently with Bishop, both men glancing back at the restaurant, then across to Emerson's Bistro where the bank manager remains visible through the window. Franklin approaches Eleanor one last time, handing her a business card with just a phone number. If you need anything before your deadline, call this number, day or night. I couldn't. Just keep it, he insists. Sometimes the strangers who help you aren't strange at all, just waiting to be recognized. The riders depart in a rumble of engines, leaving Eleanor standing in her doorway, Franklin's card in her hand, wondering about the strange intensity in his eyes when he'd mentioned the bank. What connection did these men have to Sullivan? And why did she feel like something significant had just happened? Something beyond simply feeding hungry travelers caught in a storm? The next morning, Eleanor arrives at Soul Plates to find Thomas already there, pacing anxiously. You weren't answering your phone, he says. I was worried. Power went out during the storm. Battery died. Eleanor unlocks the door, noticing something strange, a small envelope taped beside the handle, her name written in precise handwriting. Inside is a business card for Bishop's Custom Restorations and a note. Service completed with appreciation. Call if issues arise. What service? Thomas asks, reading over her shoulder. Eleanor checks the generator room and finds the entire system has been upgraded. New transfer switch, rewired connections, even a digital control panel replacing the ancient analog one. Those bikers did this, she realizes. After I closed, they must have come back. Bikers? What bikers? Thomas looks alarmed. Eleanor explains about the Midnight Riders and their visit during the storm, including Franklin's cryptic comments about the bank. Thomas runs a hand through his hair. Mama, do you know who the Midnight Riders are? They're not just any motorcycle club. Their president, Walter Bishop, used to be one of the top financial fraud investigators in the state before he retired. And they've got members who are lawyers, contractors, even a judge. How do you know this? They sponsored the youth architecture program I volunteered with last year. These aren't outlaw bikers. They're professionals with motorcycles and a community service mission. Eleanor sits heavily, processing this information as her phone rings. It's the supplier, apologizing for yesterday's system error and offering to deliver her full order immediately, including several items at no charge for the inconvenience. After hanging up, she checks her email to find notification that the health department has cleared all violations without requiring follow-up inspection. The message cites documentation provided by a third party, proving her compliance. Something's happening, she tells Thomas. First the generator, now this. The bell above the door chimes as a courier enters, delivering an envelope requiring Eleanor's signature. Inside is a letter from the city planning office apologizing for the erroneous citation regarding her awning and sign. All fines have been waived. Eleanor stares at Thomas. What is going on? I think you made some powerful friends last night, he says, looking as bewildered as she feels. The morning brings more surprises. Regular customers arrive bearing gifts, ingredients, supplies, even cash donations, saying they'd heard Soul Plates was having trouble. Heard from who? Eleanor asks Tasha when she brings in a basket of produce from her community garden. Facebook group, Tasha says, showing Eleanor her phone. Someone started a Save Soul Plates page last night. It's got 3,000 members already. The page features professional photographs of the restaurant, Eleanor's story, and testimonials from customers spanning decades. The organizer is listed only as community advocate. By noon, the restaurant is packed, busier than it's been in months. Local news crews arrive, interviewing customers about why Soul Plates matters to the neighborhood. Eleanor manages the unexpected rush with Darius and Thomas helping, her mind spinning with questions. When she finally gets a break, she steps outside for air and notices something odd across the street. Emerson's Bistro is nearly empty, a handwritten cash-only sign posted on the door. Her phone rings. An unknown number. She answers cautiously. Mrs. Wilson? Howard Sullivan from First Metropolitan Bank. His voice sounds strained. I'm calling about your mortgage situation. Eleanor braces herself. Yes? There's been a development. The bank would like to offer you a modification agreement, reduced interest, extended terms, and forgiveness of the current past due amount. Eleanor nearly drops the phone. Why the sudden change of heart? Sullivan clears his throat. Let's just say some irregularities in your account handling were brought to senior management's attention. We're eager to rectify any misunderstandings. After she hangs up, Eleanor notices a motorcycle passing slowly. Franklin, the electrical contractor from last night. He nods once, then continues on. That afternoon, Jeffrey Emerson himself appears at her counter, his usual confidence absent. Eleanor, he begins, voice lower than usual. I'd like to withdraw my purchase offer and apologize for any pressure you may have felt. That's quite a change, Jeffrey. His eyes dart nervously to the door. Sometimes we need perspective on what truly matters in business. Community relationships, for instance. As he hurries out, Eleanor spots Bishop sitting at a corner table watching Emerson's retreat with satisfaction. Bishop approaches the counter. "Beautiful day, isn't it, Mrs. Wilson?" "Surprisingly so," Eleanor agrees. "Almost like magic." Bishop smiles. "Not magic, justice. Sometimes it just needs a little help arriving on time." He places a folder on the counter. "You might want to review these documents." Copies of emails between certain parties discussing how to accelerate property acquisition in this neighborhood through some rather questionable means. Eleanor opens the folder, scanning emails between Sullivan, Emerson, and city officials outlining a coordinated plan targeting her business specifically. "How did you get these?" she whispers. "Let's just say Franklin has skills beyond electrical work, and I spent 30 years investigating financial fraud before I retired." Bishop's eyes are kind but determined. "What you're experiencing isn't bad luck, Mrs. Wilson. It's targeted predation, and we don't stand for that in our community." 2 days pass in a whirlwind of activity. Soul Plates remains unusually busy, the Save Soul Plates movement growing beyond anyone's expectations. Eleanor deposits enough cash to cover the modified mortgage payment with room to spare. Then everything collapses. Eleanor arrives Thursday morning to find police cars surrounding her restaurant, officers stringing crime scene tape across the entrance. A detective meets her at the perimeter. "Mrs. Eleanor Wilson?" "I'm Detective Brooks. We need to ask you some questions about your association with the Midnight Riders Motorcycle Club." "What's happened?" Eleanor asks, heart pounding. "Last night, someone broke into First Metropolitan Bank's data center and the city planning office. Files were accessed, security systems disabled." Brooks studies her face. "Around the same time, Jeffrey Emerson was assaulted outside his home. He's in stable condition but insists the attackers mentioned Soul Plates." "That's ridiculous," Eleanor protests. "I had nothing to do with any of this." "Perhaps not directly," Brooks concedes, "but we have witnesses placing several midnight riders at your establishment Monday night, and subsequent digital evidence connecting them to these incidents." Thomas arrives, immediately calling a lawyer friend who advises Eleanor not to answer further questions. The detective leaves, but the damage is done. Officers continue processing the restaurant as a location of interest, preventing business operations. By afternoon, the story hits local news. Beloved restaurant linked to criminal organization, complete with security footage showing the bikers entering Soul Plates during the storm. "They're twisting everything," Thomas fumes, watching the broadcast with Eleanor at her home, "making it sound like you're running some kind of front operation." Eleanor's phone hasn't stopped ringing. Reporters, concerned customers, even old friends questioning her judgment. No word from Bishop or any of the riders. Friday morning brings worse news. The bank's modification offer is withdrawn, Sullivan claiming new information regarding potential criminal connections necessitates re-evaluation of risk factors. The foreclosure is back on, payment due in full by Monday. The health department returns, citing anonymous complaints about food safety. This time, they find enough minor violations to justify temporary closure pending full inspection. "It's retaliation," Thomas says as they stand outside the shuttered restaurant. Sullivan and Emerson pushing back after whatever the riders did. Eleanor feels the weight of 32 years collapsing. "I never asked them to break laws for me. I just fed them during a storm." She tries calling Franklin's number, but it's disconnected. Bishop's business card leads to a recording stating the shop is closed indefinitely. By Saturday, Soul Plate's social media pages fill with comments questioning Eleanor's character. The Save Soul Plates group disappears entirely. Longtime customers text their support privately, but admit they're hesitant to be publicly associated given the criminal investigation. We should go to the police, Thomas suggests. Tell them everything about Sullivan and Emerson's coordination against you. With what proof? Eleanor asks. The documents Bishop gave me implicate the riders in computer crimes. If I show those to police, I'm admitting connection to what they're being investigated for. Saturday evening, Eleanor sits on her porch, watching rain fall again, softer than Monday's storm but persistent. She holds the foreclosure notice, now stamped Final Notice, in angry red letters. All the hope of the past few days has evaporated, leaving her more desperate than before. Her phone rings. Tasha, calling with another blow. Ms. Eleanor, you need to see this. They've vandalized Soul plates. Eleanor and Thomas rushed to the restaurant through the rain. Someone has spray-painted criminal across the front window. Inside, chairs are overturned and food from the refrigerators has been dumped onto the floor. Who would do this? Thomas asks, voice breaking. Eleanor touches the shattered glass of her grandmother's framed photograph, the one of opening day. Someone who wants to make sure I can't recover. As they attempt to clean up the mess, Detective Brooks appears. I'm not supposed to tell you this, he says, glancing over his shoulder. But something's not adding up in this investigation. The timing of the break-ins, Emerson's assault, it's too convenient. What do you mean? Eleanor asks. I mean Emerson's story has inconsistencies, and the surveillance footage from the bank shows figures in ski masks, not motorcycle gear. But my captain shut down those lines of inquiry fast. He hands Eleanor his card. If you have information that might help clarify things, call me directly, not through dispatch. After he leaves, Thomas examines the spray paint more closely. Mama, look at this. It's the same color as the paint they used to mark Emerson's patio furniture. I noticed it yesterday. Doesn't matter, Eleanor says, defeat weighing her voice. By Monday, this place won't be mine anymore. They work until midnight, salvaging what they can. When they finally leave, Eleanor takes one last look at Soul plates, her life's work now damaged, defaced, and on the verge of being lost forever. I just wanted to keep what Grandma Olivia built, she whispers, to pass it on someday. Thomas puts his arm around her shoulders. I know, Mama. I know. As they drive away, neither notices the unmarked van parked across the street, or the camera lens capturing their departure. Sunday morning arrives with a heaviness Eleanor hasn't felt since her husband's funeral. 3 o'clock tomorrow, the final deadline to pay or surrender everything. She sits at her kitchen table, sipping coffee that tastes like nothing, surrounded by mortgage documents and bank statements. Thomas enters, his face grim. You need to see this. He shows her his phone. Channel 7 News is reporting live from Soul plates. Overnight, someone added to the vandalism. Racial slurs spray-painted across the door, a crude noose symbol on the sidewalk. I need to go there, Eleanor says, already reaching for her keys. They're waiting for you, Thomas warns. There are news vans, police. It's still my restaurant until they take it. When they arrive, the scene is worse than the broadcast showed. A small crowd has gathered, some neighbors, some reporters, a few curiosity seekers with phones raised to capture the spectacle. Police take photos of the graffiti while an officer strings yellow tape. Eleanor approaches, head high despite the shame burning in her chest. The reporter who'd covered the Save Soul Plates story days earlier now pivots to thrust a microphone toward her. Mrs. Wilson, how do you respond to allegations that your restaurant is connected to criminal activity? And what about these troubling racial elements in the vandalism? Before Eleanor can answer, a voice cuts through the crowd. Perhaps you should be asking who benefits from this narrative. Franklin emerges from between two news vans, immaculate in a tailored suit rather than motorcycle leathers. Behind him walk 3 other riders, similarly transformed, including the silver-haired woman, now wearing a federal prosecutor's badge. I'm Franklin Washington, attorney for Mrs. Wilson, he announces loudly enough for all cameras to capture. And we've brought evidence of who's really responsible for all this. He holds up a flash drive. Last night's vandalism was captured on cameras we legally installed with Mrs. Wilson's permission after the first break-in. We have clear footage of the perpetrators. Detective Brooks pushes through the crowd. I need to see that evidence immediately. Franklin nods, handing him the drive. You'll find it interesting that the men who painted these slurs arrived in a catering van registered to Emerson's Bistro. Murmurs ripple through the crowd. The reporter's eyes widen at this unexpected development. That's not all, Franklin continues. We've also documented a systematic campaign of harassment and financial sabotage against Mrs. Wilson's business conducted by Jeffrey Emerson in coordination with bank officials and city employees. Eleanor watches in stunned silence as the scene transforms. Police officers who'd been treating her property as a crime scene now turn their attention across the street. More patrol cars arrive, and Detective Brooks emerges from his vehicle where he'd been reviewing the footage, immediately dispatching officers toward Emerson's Bistro. Thomas grips Eleanor's hand. What's happening? Franklin approaches them, speaking quietly. Bishop asked me to apologize for our silence these past days. We needed to disappear to finish building the case properly, legally. The evidence we gave you was just the beginning. I thought you were hackers, Eleanor says. Franklin smiles. Some skills from past lives come in handy, but no. We did this by the book. Subpoenas, whistleblowers, financial forensics. Bishop's old colleagues at the FBI were quite interested in the pattern once we showed them. As if summoned, a line of black SUVs pulls up. Men and women in FBI windbreakers exit, carrying document boxes into Emerson's Bistro. Across the street, Jeffrey Emerson is being escorted to a police car, protesting loudly. I don't understand, Eleanor says. Why would the FBI care about my restaurant? Because your situation isn't unique, says a familiar voice. Bishop approaches, dressed in a suit that transforms him from biker to the federal investigator he once was. Mrs. Wilson, what happened to you is happening across 5 states. Small businesses, particularly minority-owned ones, targeted for acquisition through coordinated harassment campaigns. He gestures to the silver-haired woman. This is Diane Reynolds, U.S. Attorney's Office. She's been building a RICO case against a network of developers and bank officials for 2 years. Your situation provided the final evidence they needed. Diane steps forward. We've documented 17 cases identical to yours. First, loan applications denied despite perfect credit. Then health inspections, supplier issues, credit freezes, all coordinated to force owners to sell below market value. Eleanor stares at them, pieces falling into place. And Emerson? Sullivan? Part of a larger network, Bishop confirms. Buying properties, flipping them to shell companies, laundering money from other operations. Classic gentrification with a criminal twist. The reporter, listening nearby, approaches with her cameraman. Mr. Bishop, are you saying this local restaurant owner uncovered a multi-state criminal conspiracy? No, Bishop says firmly. I'm saying Mrs. Wilson showed kindness to strangers during a storm. Everything else followed from that simple act. He turns to Eleanor, his voice softening. I never told you why this mattered so much to me. My mother owned a bakery 3 blocks from here in the 1970s. Emerson's father used these same tactics to force her out. She died still believing she'd failed somehow. Eleanor's hand flies to her mouth. Your mother was Beatrice Bishop? She made those lemon pound cakes everyone talked about? You knew her. My grandmother bought day-olds from her every week, said no one made cake like Beatrice. Bishop's eyes glisten. When we stopped here during the storm, I recognized your grandmother in that photo. Then I saw the foreclosure notice and Emerson across the street. History repeating itself. I couldn't let it happen again. The cameras continue rolling as Bishop explains how the Midnight Riders, a group formed largely of professionals who'd seen injustice in their fields, had been quietly gathering evidence on predatory development practices for years. Mrs. Wilson's kindness didn't just help 15 wet bikers, Bishop tells the reporter. It gave us the final piece we needed to bring down an organization that's destroyed dozens of family businesses and community anchors. Detective Brooks returns, addressing Eleanor. Mrs. Wilson, the bank president, is on his way here personally. Says there's been a grave misunderstanding about your mortgage situation. Franklin laughs. Amazing how quickly attitudes change when federal indictments start flying. Eleanor watches as more officials arrive. The mayor's office sending representatives, city council members suddenly concerned about small business protection. The bank president himself stepping from a town car, looking ashen. What happens now? She asks Bishop. Justice, he says simply. For my mother. For your grandmother. For everyone they've pushed out over the years. As cameras flash and the crowd grows, Eleanor realizes she's witnessing more than the salvation of her restaurant. She's seeing the exposure of a system that has worked against people like her for generations, all because she chose to feed strangers during a storm. 2 weeks later, Eleanor stands in Soul Plates' newly renovated kitchen, admiring the gleaming commercial equipment that replaced her aging appliances. The restaurant has been closed for renovations, all expenses covered by the restitution fund established after the full extent of Emerson and Sullivan's crimes became public. 17 business owners across the region, all targets of the same predatory scheme, have received similar compensation. For Eleanor, it means not just saving Soul Plates, but transforming it into the restaurant she always dreamed it could be. What do you think, Grandma Olivia? She whispers, touching the frame of the restored photograph, now hanging in a place of honor near the entrance. We did it. We held on. The bell above the door chimes. Thomas enters with Franklin and Bishop, all carrying rolled blueprints. Mama, wait until you see what the city council approved, Thomas says, excitement lighting his face. Full historical designation for Soul Plates. They can never threaten this building again. Franklin spreads the plans across a table. The preservation grant came through too. We can restore the original facade exactly as it looked when your grandmother opened in '67. And this, Bishop adds, unrolling another set of drawings, is the community kitchen space the bank is funding as part of their settlement. 5 aspiring chefs will train here each year, with full scholarships. Eleanor traces the outlines with her fingertip, still processing how completely her fortunes have reversed. Beyond saving her restaurant, the exposure of the development scheme has created a ripple effect throughout Detroit. The mayor has established a task force on predatory business practices. The state attorney general is investigating similar patterns in other cities. It's more than I ever imagined, she admits. Sometimes I wake up thinking it's all a dream. No dream, Bishop assures her. Just long overdue justice. The door opens again as Darius arrives with Tasha and several other regulars, arms loaded with decorations for tomorrow's grand reopening. The celebration has expanded beyond Eleanor's original vision, now including a block party and ribbon-cutting ceremony with city officials who suddenly discovered their deep appreciation for neighborhood institutions. As they prepare, Eleanor slips away to the small office behind the kitchen. On her desk sits a leather-bound recipe book, a gift from the Midnight Riders. Inside, they've collected and preserved not just her grandmother's recipes, but stories from customers about what Soul Plates has meant to them over 3 decades. The final page contains a photograph taken the day after the raid. Eleanor standing proudly in front of her restaurant, surrounded by riders who had shed their leather for business attire, revealing the professionals they'd been all along. Beneath it, an inscription in Bishop's neat handwriting. The truest test of character isn't how we treat those who can help us, but how we respond to those who seem to need our help. Eleanor hears laughter from the dining room. Thomas showing Tasha's children how to hang streamers. Bishop and Franklin debating the perfect position for the restored vintage neon sign. Darius directing the placement of new tables handcrafted by a rider who owns a furniture business. A knock at the open door reveals Diane from the U.S. Attorney's office. "I thought you'd want to know," she says. "Emerson took a plea deal this morning, full confession, naming co-conspirators. The whole network is coming down." Eleanor nods, satisfaction warming her chest. "And Sullivan?" "Cooperating. Seems he's eager to reduce his sentence by detailing how the bank targeted specific neighborhoods." Eleanor steps out to rejoin the others, surveying the space that's been her life's work. Tomorrow, Soul Plates will reopen stronger than ever. Not just a restaurant, but a symbol of resistance against those who would erase community history in the name of progress. She catches Bishop's eye across the room. He raises an invisible toast, his smile acknowledging everything they've accomplished together. "To kindness," he mouths silently. "To justice," she replies. 1 year later. The line outside Soul Plates stretches down the block despite the summer heat. Inside, Eleanor moves through the packed dining room, greeting regulars and newcomers alike. The restaurant's revival has made it a destination, featured in food magazines, tourism guides, and most recently, a documentary about community resistance to predatory development. At a corner table, Thomas sits with investors discussing the community architecture firm he's launched, specializing in preserving historic neighborhood buildings while creating affordable housing. The blueprints spread before them show his first major project, converting an abandoned department store into mixed-use space with Soul Plates' community kitchen as its anchor. Through the window, Eleanor watches a parade of motorcycles approach, the midnight riders escorting a group of young entrepreneurs for today's workshop. Since the case broke open, the riders have formalized their community advocacy, establishing a legal aid fund for small business owners facing similar challenges across the country. Bishop enters, no longer the intimidating figure from that stormy night, but a familiar friend. "Ready for your first ride?" he asks, holding out a leather jacket with Soul Plates embroidered across the back. Eleanor laughs. "At my age?" "My mother always said she'd ride one day, but waited too long," Bishop reminds her. "Some opportunities don't come twice." Outside, under a perfect blue sky, Eleanor Wilson, grandmother, restaurant owner, unexpected catalyst for change, climbs onto the back of Bishop's motorcycle. As they lead the parade down streets once threatened by erasure, now protected by new regulations and watchful communities, she raises her fist in triumph. When you stand firm in your worth, even storms bring allies. Has someone extended unexpected kindness to you? Or have you helped a stranger only to find the good returned multiplied? Share your story at #KindnessWins and remind us all. Sometimes recognition comes from the most unexpected places. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Hit like to help others discover these powerful narratives of kindness, justice, and resilience. Subscribe to Beat Stories for more emotional roller coasters that will leave you thinking long after the last word. Every week, we bring you authentic tales where underdogs triumph and humanity shines through the cracks of broken systems.